In terms of the fourth quarter, they had all but one of their buckets was inside the paint. Was that them just being able to get into the paint and get whatever they want because of that point of attack defense like you were talking about?
Yeah, they had that and 9 free throws.
Stephanie White didn't raise her voice. She didn't flip over a table or storm out of the press conference. Instead, she looked straight into the camera and dropped 5 words that echoed across the entire WNBA. "We didn't get the calls." That was it. 5 words. No shouting, no dramatic pause. Just cold, hard truth. And anyone who watched the Indiana Fever's heartbreaking loss to the Los Angeles Sparks knew exactly what she meant. This wasn't just a tough night. This wasn't about missed shots or tired legs. This was about something deeper, something fans, players, and even analysts are starting to say out loud. The referees changed the outcome of that game. The Fever walked into the matchup missing their biggest star, Caitlin Clark, yet they were still favored to win. They had momentum, they had firepower, and they were fighting like champions. But none of that mattered, because in the fourth quarter, it wasn't the players who decided the game, it was the whistle. And when Stephanie White stepped up to the mic, she said what her players couldn't. This wasn't just a loss, it was a warning. The WNBA has an officiating problem and someone finally called it out.
We should have won this game. There was inconsistencies in the officiating. Wait until you see the second half. And I have everything.
The Indiana Fever had been on a roll. Coming into their matchup with the Los Angeles Sparks, they had won 3 straight games. Not just any games. They had taken down the Dallas Wings, crushed the Minnesota Lynx, and stunned the Las Vegas Aces. These weren't fluke wins. They were complete performances. The kind of games that had fans whispering about a deep postseason run. Even without Caitlin Clark on the floor, the Fever looked like a team finding its identity, locking in defensively, and building real chemistry. For the first time all season, things were starting to click. Aaliyah Boston was playing like the all-star she is, controlling the paint with confidence and putting up dominant numbers. Kelsey Mitchell, the franchise's longtime scoring machine, was stepping up in Clark's absence, notching big shots in crucial moments. Natasha Howard was showing her veteran savvy, delivering on both ends of the court. The team looked balanced, energized, and most importantly, dash-hungry. So when the schedule pointed to a matchup with the struggling Los Angeles Sparks, the prediction was almost unanimous. Indiana would roll. The Sparks were one of the league's worst teams on paper, with only a handful of wins to show for a rocky season. The Fever were surging, and even without their biggest star, analysts expected them to take care of business with little trouble. ESPN's matchup predictor gave Indiana a nearly 73% chance to win. The sportsbooks had them favored by 6.5 points. In every metric that mattered, the Fever were the superior team. But there was more happening beneath the surface. Caitlin Clark had been sidelined with a groin injury for several games. And while the team had adjusted, her absence was still being felt. Her playmaking opens up the floor in ways no one else on the roster can replicate. The spacing suffers without her. The rhythm slows down. Players like Boston, who thrive on quick decision-making and crisp passes, find themselves working harder. For every shot, and even though Mitchell and Howard were stepping up, there was only so much they could do without Clark pulling defenders and dictating the tempo. On top of that, DeWanna Bonner's shocking midseason departure had shaken the locker room. Add in the absence of Dantas, who was away for international duties, and suddenly, the Fever were down 3 key pieces. Yet despite all that, they still controlled their own destiny. They had every reason to believe they could win this game. That confidence wasn't misplaced. For most of the game, Indiana battled toe-to-toe with the Sparks. They hustled, they fought, and they kept themselves in it. This wasn't a team rolling over from fatigue or frustration. They were playing with pride. But what happened next wasn't about effort or execution. It wasn't about who had the better game plan. It was about who had control of the whistle. And from that moment on, everything changed.
That last play that I'm speaking about, it seemed like they called it a loose ball foul at first, which would have been favorable for us because we have them in the bonus. Yeah, we were in the bonus with 5.5 minutes left to go. First time all season, I was shocked. We grabbed the rebound. Looked like they called it a loose ball foul. Yikes, we could go to the free throw line. Oh, they changed it.
Caitlin Clark's absence wasn't new, but the effects of it, continued to haunt the Indiana Fever. This was her 5th straight game on the bench with a lingering groin injury. And while the coaching staff called it a day-to-day situation, fans were starting to feel the weight of her absence. Clark is more than a scorer. She's the engine of Indiana's offense. Her presence on the court transforms the entire team dynamic, from the spacing of the shooters to the timing of the bigs in the paint. Without her, the entire system starts to wobble. Stephanie White and the staff did everything they could to adjust. They emphasized long-term health, saying it wasn't worth rushing Clark back too soon. That's fair, but when you're offensive, identity is built around a player's court vision, tempo control, and scoring gravity. Removing her causes ripple effects you can't always predict. Suddenly, the ball movement slows. The open looks don't come as easily. The defense isn't as stretched. And most importantly, players who excel in structured roles are forced into uncomfortable situations. That's exactly what started happening. Aaliyah Boston, typically dominant inside, when Clark feeds her at just the right moment, was having to work overtime to get clean touches. Defenders collapsed on her faster, knowing the kickout threat wasn't as dangerous. Kelsey Mitchell, normally the secondary scorer, became the primary option. That put added pressure on her to create her own looks instead of working within the system. Even Natasha Howard, the team's steady veteran, had to increase her usage, taking more shots, making more decisions, and shouldering more responsibility than usual. And it wasn't just the offense that suffered. The defense had to pick up the slack, too. Without Clark's ability to control, pace, and minimize turnovers, the Fever found themselves defending more possessions. That meant tired legs, slower rotations, and increased vulnerability in the second half. They weren't just missing a star. Players, they were missing their system's stabilizer. Yet, somehow, they were still winning. They still found ways to compete. That's a testament to how much this team has grown. They didn't fall apart. They didn't give up. They battled through it with toughness and pride. They proved they could compete with top-tier teams without their superstar. That's what made the loss to the Sparks so infuriating, because this wasn't a team that came in flat or defeated. This was a team that came in prepared to fight, and they did. Even without Clark, they held their own. They didn't lose this game because of talent. They didn't lose because of fatigue. They didn't lose because of poor coaching. They lost because something else interfered. The moment the referees began inserting themselves into the outcome, it didn't matter how hard the Fever played. And that's the tragedy of it. A team that fought through adversity, adjusted their system, and showed heart still couldn't overcome the one opponent no one plans for: bad officiating. From the very first quarter, something felt off. The Fever came out with urgency, moving the ball crisply, attacking the paint, and trying to dictate the pace of it without Caitlin Clark. But the energy in the arena shifted almost immediately, not because of the players, but because of the officiating. The whistle started early, and it started loud, especially against Indiana. Touch fouls were being called on Aaliyah Boston, even when she played straight-up defense. Natasha Howard couldn't get physical in the post without getting flagged. Meanwhile, on the other end, the Sparks were allowed to play with contact, bump cutters, and press without repercussion. It was clear the standards weren't the same. For both teams, Stephanie White saw it, and so did everyone watching. At first, you hope it's just inconsistency that will even out. But it didn't. As the minutes rolled on, the calls became more lopsided. Sophie Cunningham was grabbed around the neck on a rebound and no whistle. Aaliyah Boston was whistled for a light contest where she didn't even make contact. The crowd started booing. The Fever bench threw up their arms. Still, the refs doubled down. It wasn't just about individual calls, it was about momentum. Every time the Fever started to build a rhythm, the whistle would interrupt it. A clean block called a foul. A solid box out. Somehow, a loose ball foul. And yet, the same physicality was being allowed for the Sparks on the other end. When Indiana tried to speed up the game, the officials slowed it down. When Indiana tried to close the gap, the officials widened it. The timing of the calls made it impossible for the Fever to establish any sort of control. One particular moment stood out. Kelsey Plum elbowed Lexi Hull in the fourth quarter and then intentionally stepped over her as she tried to get up. The ref was right, they're just feet away, and still didn't blow the whistle. That wasn't a missed call, that was a decision. And it echoed throughout the game. The message was clear. Indiana wouldn't be getting any favors tonight, no matter how egregious the contact. By the end of the third quarter, Boston was in foul trouble. McDonald couldn't play aggressively without being penalized. Mitchell was forced to play cautious on defense. It wasn't just a physical handicap, it became mental. The players looked hesitant, second-guessing themselves on both ends of the floor. That's what questionable officiating does. It doesn't just ruin flow. It undermines confidence, it punishes hustle, and it puts players in a no-win situation where doing their job suddenly feels like a risk. And yet, the Fever kept pushing. They refused to roll over. But it was already obvious to anyone watching this wasn't going to be decided by talent or grit. This game was being rewritten, possession by possession, foul by foul. From the opening tip, the whistle was tilted on. Indiana was playing uphill the entire way. By the time the fourth quarter rolled around, the Indiana Fever were still within striking distance. Despite missing Caitlin Clark, despite playing without 3 key contributors, and despite foul trouble hobbling their lineup, they were right. There, Aaliyah Boston had been dominating the paint all night. Kelsey Mitchell was hitting clutch shots. Natasha Howard was showing poise and leadership. The game was close, but the referees made sure it wouldn't stay that way. This is where things completely unraveled. Not because Indiana collapsed, but because the officiating reached a boiling point. One possession after another was marred by inconsistency. On one end, Sparks players were initiating contact with no whistle. On the other, the Fever were being called for barely grazing an elbow or stepping into a passing lane. It wasn't just frustrating, it was debilitating. Boston picked up her third and fourth fouls on plays where there was little to no contact. Both times, she simply contested shots with her arms straight up. No body, no hack, just clean defense. But the whistle blew and Boston had to sit. That changed everything. The Fever lost their anchor in the paint during the most critical minutes. Of the game then came the infamous Sophie Cunningham sequence. She was literally grabbed around the neck, going for a loose ball no call. The refs instead ruled it a jump ball. Moments later, she was thrown to the floor on another possession, and still no whistle. Meanwhile, Indiana players were getting penalized for basic defensive positioning. It wasn't just unfair, it was absurd. Kelsey Plum, on the other hand, seemed to get away with everything. She elbowed Lexi Hull, stepped over her while she was down, and drew no flagrant, no technical, not even a personal foul. Right in front of the official, Lexi Hull was visibly shocked. The fans were livid. Social media lit up with clips of the non-call, with fans and commentators alike asking, "How is this acceptable in a professional league?" McDonald also found herself targeted, picking up back-to-back fouls without doing anything more than standing. In help defense, you could see the frustration on every Fever player's face. They were fighting with everything they had only to be undercut by the people supposed to uphold fairness, and that's what made this loss sting even more. Indiana didn't get outplayed. They didn't lose because they lacked heart or skill. They lost because the game was taken out of their hands. The Fever weren't just battling the Sparks, they were battling the officials. 2. Stephanie White, usually measured in her post-game comments, had seen enough. Her body language said it all. The disappointment, the disbelief, the fire. The players gave everything and got nothing in return. This was supposed to be a win. Instead, it became a case study in how bad officiating can erase even the strongest performance. And that fourth quarter made it undeniable. After the final buzzer, the arena was filled with confusion, frustration, and disbelief. The Fever had just lost a game they should have won a game. They fought tooth and nail to stay in despite being shorthanded and unfairly officiated. Fans were still buzzing, players were still shaking their heads, and the press room was tense with anticipation. That's when Stephanie White walked in, calm, composed, but clearly done holding back. And what she said next ignited a fire across the Wanba? We didn't get the calls. 5 words, no yelling, no excuses, just a brutal, honest truth. In that moment, Stephanie White didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for her players, her fans, and every coach who's had to bite their tongue while watching officiating decide a basketball game. Her tone was low, but her words echoed with power. It wasn't just a critique. It was an accusation, plain and simple. and it hit like a gut punch to a league that's already facing major scrutiny over its officiating. White is not a coach known for making excuses. She's played the game, she's coached at the highest levels, and she knows what it means to earn wins the hard way. But this time, the game wasn't lost on the court, it was lost at the whistle. Her players gave everything. Aaliyah Boston battled foul trouble and still put up MVP numbers. Kelsey Mitchell hit big shots in pressure moments. Natasha Howard brought poise and intensity. They didn't fall short, they were held back. And the timing of White's quote couldn't have been more significant. The WNBA is in the middle of a cultural boom, with Caitlin Clark bringing in millions of new eyes. With that spotlight comes more pressure and more accountability. When officiating fails under that microscope, it doesn't just impact a game, it damages the league's credibility. Fans aren't just upset, they're angry. Clips of bad calls go viral in minutes. Commentators debate fairness on national television. And when a coach like Stephanie White adds her voice to that outrage, it becomes impossible to ignore. The response online was immediate. Fans flooded social media with slow motion, clips of the worst no-calls and phantom fouls. Analysts defended White's statement. Even some players liked posts questioning the officiating. It wasn't just Fever fans who felt robbed, it was neutral viewers too. The sense of injustice was palpable. This wasn't about favoritism or bias toward one team. It was about accountability, about fairness, about how hard it is for players to give their all when the rules seem to shift depending on the jersey. Stephanie White didn't rant or scream. She didn't need to. Her restraint made the message louder. By saying less, she said more. Didn't get the calls will be remembered not just as a coach's comment, but as a turning point, a moment when someone inside the system finally called it out. And now, the league has a decision to make: listen or lose the trust of the people watching. The WNBA is growing. Social media engagement is higher than ever. But with all that momentum comes a new kind of pressure expectations. Fans want more than just flashy plays and buzzer beaters. They want fairness, consistency, credibility. And right now, officiating is the one thing threatening to derail all of that. This game between the Indiana Fever and the Los Angeles Sparks wasn't just one bad night. It was the latest in a series of questionable decisions by referees that fans and players alike are starting to call out. When every single controversial moment gets clipped, slowed down, and posted online within minutes, there's nowhere for the league to hide. You can't defend a phantom foul that changes the outcome. The footage is out there, and it's damaging. The biggest problem, it's becoming a pattern. Caitlin Clark has been on the receiving end of hard fouls with no whistle. Aaliyah Boston has lived in foul trouble for weeks on barely their contact. Sophie Cunningham gets grabbed and tossed to the floor, and nothing happens. Meanwhile, players like Kelsey Plum seem to skate by without punishment for similar or worse actions. The inconsistency isn't just frustrating, it's undermining the integrity of the game, and fans are noticing. In a league where every new viewer matters, this kind of controversy can have real consequences. When a team gives its all, and still, it takes the focus off the sport and puts it on the drama. That might generate clicks for a moment, but it chips away at long-term trust. Stephanie White's 5 words weren't just about one game. They were about a growing sense that something is broken. She gave voice to the frustration boiling just beneath the surface. And now, the league has a choice: address the issue or risk losing the goodwill they've spent years trying to build. This isn't about blaming officials for every loss. It's about recognizing that when games are this close, a handful of missed or inconsistent calls can swing the outcome. It's about asking for accountability, not perfection. Why shouldn't referees be held to the same standard? As the WNBA tries to expand its audience and establish itself as a major sports league, these cracks in the foundation can't be ignored. You can have elite talent, sold-out arenas, and viral moments, but if fans don't trust the fairness of the product, none of that will last. If the league wants to protect its future, it needs to start by protecting the game's integrity. That means evaluating, officiating. That means consequences for repeated errors. And most importantly, it means listening, because coaches like Stephanie White aren't speaking out for no reason. They're sounding the alarm. For all the heartbreak, frustration, and anger that came from this game, something unexpected happened in its aftermath. The Indiana Fever didn't fall apart. They didn't implode in the locker room or point fingers at each other. Instead, something much more dangerous happened for the rest of the league. They got sharper, louder, hungrier. Stephanie White's post-game words didn't deflate her players. They lit a fire under them. The message was clear. This wasn't about talent, effort, or game plan. This was about getting cheated. And when a team believes they've been cheated not out of effort, but out of justice, it creates a different kind of edge. One rooted in pride, pain, and payback. That's the mood now in Indiana. Aaliyah Boston has every reason to be furious. She played like a superstar, finishing with 23 points and 12 rebounds, dominating on both ends until foul trouble robbed her of a chance to close out the game. Kelsey Mitchell continued to step into the spotlight in Clark's absence, dropping 19 points and hitting 3 crucial threes. Natasha Howard brought leadership and near double-double production. These 3 women played like champions, but instead of walking out with a win, they left with fire in their eyes. You could see it even in the final seconds of the game. Lexi Hull looking stunned as the whistle didn't blow after she was stepped over, McDonald shaking her head in disbelief, Boston clenching her jaw, trying not to erupt. These weren't players who felt outmatched. They were players who felt betrayed. And betrayal, when harnessed properly, can become the most powerful motivator. The team knows what's being said, that they're nothing without Clark, that they're overhyped, that they can't close games. But the truth is, this loss proved the opposite. They can play without Clark. They can compete even when missing 3 key pieces. They can battle against both opponents and officials and still almost win. That kind of resilience doesn't vanish. It gets stronger, and now, with Clark close to returning, the Fever are poised to become something else entirely. Dangerous. They've been forged in controversy, tightened by adversity, and hardened by frustration. These kinds of experiences define a team. They're the losses that get written down, that get remembered, that get circled when the schedule comes back around. Stephanie White isn't the kind of coach who loses the locker room. She's the kind who turns pain into fuel, who uses a bad call to teach poise, who turns disrespect into strategy. And after this game, it's clear the team is buying in. They didn't lose their fight, they found a new one. So yes, they were robbed. But they didn't fold. They grew sharper. And the next time the Fever find themselves in a close game with the whistle swinging, don't be surprised if this moment, the pain, the silence, the 5 words pushes them over the top. This loss hurt, but it might be the one that changes everything. What happened in that game wasn't just about a bad whistle. It was about respect, about power, about a young team learning exactly where they stand in, deciding they're not okay with it. The Indiana Fever didn't just lose a basketball game. They were taught in the most brutal way that sometimes effort, strategy, and talent don't matter if the system working against you is stronger. But what makes this moment powerful is how they responded. Not with excuses, not with collapse, but with a quiet rage that now fuels every step they take. The WNBA is in a spotlight like never before. With Caitlin Clark ushering in millions of new eyes, everything is magnified. Every foul, every no call, every coach's quote, every tweet. And when the integrity of the officiating is questioned this loudly by someone like Stephanie Whitta, former player, an NCAA champion, a respected voice in the game, it means the issue has crossed a line that can't be ignored anymore. Her throw. 5 words weren't just about one night. They were about a pattern, and her players knew it. Aaliyah Boston, for example, is no stranger to contact. She plays through more bumps, hacks, and body blows than almost anyone in the league. But to see her get called for 3 touch fouls while taking harder hits with no whistle, it wasn't just frustrating, it was demoralizing. Still, she never broke composure. And that silence, that focus, it's more dangerous than any outburst. Kelsey Mitchell, who's carried this franchise through its darkest years, now finds herself in a leadership role she didn't ask for but wears like armor. She's the voice in the huddle, the one taking the big shots, the one keeping the team in games when everything is falling apart. She didn't need to say anything post-game. Her performance said it for her. We're not backing down, even younger. Role players like Hull and McDonald are starting to grow into something harder. They've seen the politics of the league up close now. They've seen how unfair it can feel. But instead of retreating, they're leaning in. That's what makes this team so compelling. They aren't naive anymore. They've been burned. And now, they're ready to fight back. This was a line in the sand, a statement not just from White, but from the whole Fever organization. They will not be the quiet team anymore. They will not accept second-class treatment. Not from the refs, not from the league, not from fans who write them off without Clark, because they've proven they can hang with anyone Evan while handcuffed by bad officiating. So when Caitlin Clark returns, don't expect just excitement. Expect revenge. Expect focus. Expect a team that has walked through the fire and come out sharper, meaner, and hungrier. This wasn't just a bad loss. This was the moment Indiana decided they were done asking for respect and ready to take it by force. Stephanie White didn't need a dramatic rant to make headlines. Her calm, measured 5 words, "We didn't get the calls," did all the talking. And behind that statement was a team that gave everything they had, only to watch the game slip through their fingers because of forces beyond their control. This wasn't about a poor shooting night or bad execution. This was about being denied a fair fight. The Indiana Fever walked into that game battered, missing their star, and still played with heart. Boston dominated, Mitchell led, Howard stepped up. But it still wasn't enough, not because they weren't good enough, but because the system tilted against them. That injustice lit a fire. It turned disappointment into fuel. Now, the rest of the league has a problem. A fully healthy Fever team won't just be talented, they'll be angry, focused, and out for payback. Every whistle, every slight, every team that took advantage while they were down will be remembered. This wasn't just a bad night. It was the spark of something bigger. The Fever are done staying quiet. And when Caitlin Clark returns, they won't just want to win, they'll want to make a statement,